Hey there, everybody, welcome to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast, now with 100% more rock. Montreal's rock station CJIM, to be exact, Cheap Pop. We're now airing every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. However, if you're listening to us live and you fear you may miss an episode, fret not. All episodes will continue to be available on rowdywrestling.net and on iTunes as ridiculously early as Wednesday morning can be. Go get your rowdy on. I'm Sterling Tony Stabile, and if this is your first go-around with us, thank you very, very much. The archive of well over a year's worth of episodes is over at rowdywrestling.net. Rowdy Wrestling Podcast is a fan-supported homegrown pro wrestling podcast with the main goal of sharing our love of pro wrestling and showcasing local indie wrestlers from in and around the Montreal area. We come every week talking pro wrestling, talking WWE, talking TNA, talking some of the more obscure things like from Japan or Mexico, just having some fun. But before we get into the show proper, I must remind you to keep warm this fall season while wearing the best pro wrestling inspired clothing in the world. Heelsandfaces.com is your one-stop shop to keep warm and look fly, as the kids used to say when I was relevant. Pick up the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast t-shirts, and at checkout use the offer code ROWDY. That's in all caps, ROWY. That's because you're yelling. And get 10% off your total purchase. That's any shirt, any pair of pants, any hoodie, anything over at rowdywrestling.net. You'll get 10% off using the coupon code ROWDY. Do it. Another way to support the podcast is to like on Facebook, follow on Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube and iTunes. Leave a comment and a 5-star rating that grows and pushes the podcast up the rankings to get more eyes and ears on the show, helping me pay them bills and keep this podcast 100% free and funny. After the jump, we'll be joined by Steve Rockamaniac to review Hell in a Cell and some of the biggest news in pro wrestling this week. Keep it locked to Montreal's rock station, CJIM, only on CJIM.ca and TuneIn Radio.
There's a rowdy crowd today.
This is the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast on Montreal's rock station, CJIM.ca. I'm Sterling Tony Stabile. Thank you for joining us to talk this incredibly vexing pay-per-view. It's been split almost down the middle over the people's reaction to the event. Many hated it, some loved it. All depended on your view and what matches you expected to have on the card and where on the card. And here's to review the pay-per-view with me, Steve Rockamaniac. How's it going, brother?
Hey now, everybody. Tony, great to be back with you. And how great is it that we are back in the Montreal airwaves?
It feels great. It's a new home. You know, our telecommute studio is quite spacious. If only the people knew.
Oh, if only the people knew.
So,
well, one day we'll have a reveal, a behind the scenes, of the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast episode, and we'll spill all the beans. Once our new listenership is clamoring for the details of the behind the scenes of the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast, we'll have a great episode one day.
That's called the Christmas episode.
What did we do in the Christmas episode, Tony?
Oh, that one's not fit for the airwaves.
Oh, okay.
All right, seriously, let's get down to business. We had the WWE Hell in a Cell event. The way they promoted it, 3 main events after they realized that they didn't know who they wanted to be on last on the show. And no joke, I was getting word, and we're reading everywhere, that they legitimately changed their mind about 1,000 times between Monday last week and Friday before the event, because they finally announced it Friday afternoon that Charlotte challenging Sasha Banks in the Chamber for the Women's Championship would be the main event, seeing as they wanted to make history. They wanted to do a first. Women's Revolution this, Women's Revolution that. Oh, and Sasha Banks' hometown crowd.
Yeah, there was a lot of debate going into this, and I mean, it's definitely a topic that was worthy of debate. I mean, we talked about how women's wrestling was reaching new levels, especially during the days of NXT when Bailey and Sasha were headlining those quarterly shows, those quarterly pay-per-views, if you will, and they were tearing the house down. I remember last year, these two girls had a matchup that was, not only worthy of being on the show, but worthy of being in the main event of that show of NXT. But the debate was always as to whether or not, that would happen on a WWE pay-per-view. And much like Dana White in the UFC saying, well, women will never fight in my octagon, saying never will they ever fight in my octagon, and eventually Ronda Rousey, becoming one of the biggest stars in the world of mixed martial arts. In the world of the WWE, people said, well, they'll never have a women's match really be the main event. And for that matter, they decided to put it in a Hell in a Cell. Another, interesting decision because, there was some worry about, who might get injured in such a matchup because you never really had the girls go to that level.
And Sasha Banks is just so tiny.
Well, yeah, that's it, but also whether or not they'd be able to carry it. I mean, especially having to follow a Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins in a Hell in a Cell match, it's quite something to follow. So they had quite a huge, challenge ahead of them to main event that pay-per-view. And as we saw, within the WWE, there was a lot of debate leading into the pay-per-view, as you mentioned, but not only with the match placement, but also the match results. Because apparently, we're hearing that the result of that matchup, they waited to the last day to figure it out, just a couple hours beforehand. And, we'll talk about the results, but apparently it wasn't supposed to go that way.
No, it really wasn't. So let's go ahead and break down the show, match per match. Point blank, did you see the pre-show?
No, I did not see the pre-show.
Neither did I, and nobody else did. You had the faces, Cedric Alexander, Lince Dorado, and Sin Cara defeating Tony Nese, Drew Gulak, and Arya Daivari in a 6-man, as they keep pushing it down our throats, cruiserweight action match.
I don't know. Are you in the same boat as what it seems to become the majority now, that, this cruiserweight division was not the greatest of ideas?
It was no. Here's the thing. It was a fantastic idea and could have been so much more if you decided to treat it much like the UFC treats their divisions. Each champion is the champion of the world, the tippy top. You could possibly be a premier athlete. But what I feel they did here is they looked at a bunch of guys that looked far smaller than their big names, with the exception of like AJ Styles, and said, you know what? We can't treat the women poorly anymore. Let's go ahead and treat small guys poorly. And they've effectively been placed into that position. If you look on the past couple of pay-per-views, they've had the P-break match. They've had the calm down spot that was typically reserved for the women right up until about a year ago.
Yeah, they have assumed that spot, but I don't know, in a way it's a shame because, I mean, they have much more potential to be something much bigger than that. I'd much rather have a Rusev as a piss match because, I mean, quite frankly, that's how they've treated him and used him mostly over the last year or two.
But here's the difference. Here's the difference. They'll at least give Rusev the mic to get his personality over, and Rusev being such a fantastic human being, it gets over with it. The difference here is the two guys you give mic time to, predominantly since the division came to Monday Night Raw, have been Brian Kendrick, not Bryan Danielson, and TJP. Both guys known for not being great on the stick. Great in the ring, but not great in the stick. So what you end up getting here is a division that keeps getting pulled down because they can't be entertaining outside of the matches.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, hopefully they can find something, a new formula here to really get that to a level that was like in WCW or was like the X division in TNA. It's definitely something at first when the idea was announced is what people were hoping that we would get. So, I don't know if that door is closed just yet, but hopefully there's something they can figure out.
Well, what kills them for the live crowd is that they take the time. I don't think people have noticed this. They take the time to put new ring skirts and retape the ring ropes. We've gotten reports from live events of the crowd just losing their minds, because this takes about 10, 12 minutes to do. So you have to take the longest break ever.
Oh yeah, if anybody knows that, it's you and I, Tony. We've built a few rings in our days, so it's not something that goes by very quick, which is always annoying to a crowd. It kills your crowd.
Exactly.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just about to say, if anything, you have these big LED boards everywhere. Why not just change the graphic and leave it at that?
Seriously.
No, you need the purple Raw logo. Like it means anything. Enough dwelling on this. We mentioned Rusev. The first match of the night, proper, on the pay-per-view, we had Roman Reigns defending his U.S. Championship in a Hell in the Cell. In my mind, the only match that deserved a Hell in the Cell match due to storyline. In the opener of the night, Roman Reigns defeating Rusev in 24 minutes and 35 seconds. We have to note, longest match of the night, and the only match without tomfoolery within the cage.
Yeah, absolutely. They gave a lot of time to this, and Rusev came off strong throughout the match. He was dominating most of the way, but we all know that spoiler, Roman Reigns wins is often the trend when it comes to Roman Reigns matches, because they, no matter what, they'll always they'll always try to get his over and get his rub, but they got a lot of time, and I liked how they booked it. Despite the amount of time, they played out a story, like you said, not only leading into the pay-per-view and having been worthy to be in the Hell in a Cell, but also at the same time, they took the time to do a long match on a brand-only pay-per-view and make sure that it meant something in the ring.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where I think, like one, I have to point out, Rusev is so good right now. I know you took a moment to blast him, and I'm going to take it personally, not only as a Rusev fan, but also for the fact that here's a guy that had the crowd cheering for him and booing for him at the same time. You got the John Cena treatment, while Roman Reigns, their supposed guy, got zero reaction. We were getting "Let's go Rusev, Rusev sucks" chants, and then he's so, I feel he's getting into a weird, not into a weird, but a good position where you can have this guy come in and lose, and he's not going to lose his credibility, because this sort of match, you end up seeing, an iconic moment. And I'm throwing this out there. I'm going to get a lot of hate on this on the internet, and likely from you. But the one time I feel the submission on the steel steps works is this. You had the Accolade, where you could actually torque the guy a little further back, kind of like how he does to the smaller guys. And then using the chain in Roman Reigns' mouth, that image will probably be replayed now for the PG era of Hell in a Cell matches for torture. I think that's the kind of imagery we're going to see next year during the build-up for this pay-per-view, when they talk about how diabolical and evil that structure is.
Oh, undoubtedly. I definitely agree with you there in terms of the fact that this will be that stock footage used for Hell in a Cell matches for years to come. Hands down, absolutely. But of course, Super Roman eventually powers out of it.
Yeah. Well, Super Roman does power out of it. The only defense is, this is what I found really funny. You had the use of a kendo stick and a chain, where Rusev was taking all that punishment to his skin, while Roman Reigns was wearing a padded flak jacket and still acting like it hurt. Like that hurt my brain.
Yeah, that happens often.
Oh,
Sometimes we just have to, pop a Tylenol and go to the next match.
Then we had Bayley defeating Dana Brooke. Hopefully this is the end of their storyline, as I don't know how Vince McMahon and Kevin Dunn did it, but they got the crowd to chant "boring" and "this sucks" during a Bayley segment on Monday Night Raw leading into this match.
Yeah, absolutely. But she still got a huge reaction out in the live pay-per-view crowd, though.
Oh, no, she did. Because when they realized that, here we go, we're going to have a match, this is going to go where it needs to go, and hopefully, because it's on pay-per-view, we won't have any shenanigans. And this is what we got. We got a straight wrestling match. The one poor thing about this is Dana, 3 years removed, was nowhere near the wrestling scene. versus Bayley, who's really great, but you know she's no Ric Flair at this point. She can't have a 5-star match out of Dana, and this was the proof. This match, thankfully, the crowd in my mind was very hot because Bayley didn't have much to work with Dana Brooke.
No, we kind of knew going into this that, especially when we saw Bayley come up to the main roster on Raw, that, you know, unless she's fighting, you know, Charlotte or Sasha for the title, then she is kind of lost in the mix. And this was a prime example of that, where she has this side feud going on with Dana Brooke. And like you mentioned, Dana Brooke is a weak wrestler at this point in time, and she's not going to be able to do much in terms of pulling off a great matchup. And luckily, Bayley is seemingly going to move on from this and get involved in the women's title match, the women's title picture. So, you know, it didn't necessarily hurt her, even though they booed and said this match sucks and blah, blah, blah on Raw. They still had the huge pop for Bayley at the pay-per-view. Luckily, they can recover from this now. They haven't hurt her, and they still have an out to go forward now and have her go for the title.
Yeah, it's really one of those circumstances where you sit back and you look at the landscape. You bring up Bayley with all this fanfare. You waited so long to pull the trigger, and you kind of did it at weird moments. And then she just kind of fell into this position where I feel like Sami Zayn has gotten into. So you got to really be careful with how you treat Bayley going forward. Because you thrust her into that title position, kind of, maybe, sort of, then took it away from her. Then you put her down to have that secondary feud with the sidekick who's not all that great in the ring to begin with. So you got to be very, very careful the way you do this. We're going to take a very quick break here, and we're going to come back with more of our review of WWE Hell in a Cell. I wasn't going to say Elimination Chamber once more. Right here on Montreal's rock station, CJIM.
What's up, everybody? My name is Chris Aros, invading this show to plug my stuff, and that is www.prowrestlingtees.com/Chris Aros, and buy your loved ones the greatest gift of them all, and that's a Chris Aros t-shirt. Do it now.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast here on CJIM.ca. I'm Tony Stabile. We're being joined by Steve Rockamaniac, breaking down, dissecting, and reviewing WWE Hell in a Cell 2016. We're about a third of the way into the card. We're about to dive into a match that, happy with the result, but is breaking my heart the way they're treating the club, as Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson defeated Enzo Amore and Big Cass in barely even 6.5 minutes. This feud, which is still continuing after the event, is mind-boggling.
That's the problem, though, with the tag team division. I mean, right now they obviously have the New Day thing going on, where they want them to beat Demolition's record all time, because Demolition's on the outs with the company and suing them and blah blah blah. So okay, let's erase their record and have New Day retain the titles and pass this 560 days or something along those lines. So and have them become those all-time champions. So the rest of the tag division is kind of like in this limbo, and you have two great tag teams here in not obviously the club, which we all had high hopes for when they came over from Japan and finally got together and got their debut on TV, but also Enzo and Cass. I mean, how over they were in NXT. A lot of people were excited to see them finally debut in the main roster. And then you put these two guys together, and it's kind of like, well, okay, well, what do we do here? Because you kind of got to protect both brands. You don't want to hurt these guys in either way. So you give a certain shine to one, you give a certain shine to the other. The Bullet Club, I guess, or the club as we should call them in WWE, unfortunately has been dealt numerous losses. I mean, AJ was the same before he eventually got to the title. I remember you and I having this discussion on numerous occasions on previous broadcasts of the Rowdy Wrestling podcast, where we talked about, and debated how they were making AJ Styles look during his first few months of his run in the company. I kind of defended it at the time, and he ended up, being where he is right now. The club has kind of fallen into the same thing as well, where they're not necessarily getting it over here, but they're trying to figure out how they could do this 50-50 booking in the long terms, and that's probably why they continue to do this.
Well, the match itself, let's really just take a quick look into it. Started off with Enzo Amore and Big Cass coming out, and I'm gonna give them big props, probably more to Enzo than Big Cass. He's like the one writing everything. They made an incredibly long-winded, slow build reference to Toy Story that paid off so huge that that on Monday Night Raw, they came out dressed as Woody and Buzz Lightyear. But it was so magically beautiful that I thoroughly enjoyed it. But in the end, what you got here was your typical, club versus Enzo Amore Big Cass match that we've seen in some form week in, week out for the past probably 4 months at this point. You said it right there. The club are kind of falling into the holding pattern that AJ Styles was before the brand extension. The one issue is here, they're in a weird holding pattern of a tag division that only has 4 teams. You've got Amore and Cass, you've got the club, you have at this point Cesaro and Sheamus and the champions, the New Day. There are a couple other teams, but these are really nobodies. Golden Truth, the Shining Stars. Like, there's really nobody, to the point where on Monday Night Raw, you have Enzo Amore and Big Cass put over the Smackdown tag team division, going, oh man, they actually have some people. And when you take a moment to think about it, they don't. But they're, compared to Raw, I feel the Smackdown tag team division feels like they have more depth, even though they're only going to rely on 1 or 2 teams ever at any point. So it feels like this match, once again, it's the Bayley Dana Brooke tag team version. They're really in a holding pattern because right now they want to put the spotlight on Cesaro and Sheamus because they can't put the spotlight on them individually, so they put them in a team and just continue to be fodder for the New Day on their quest for that demolition, just the demolition record.
Yeah, I kind of wonder, if Vince McMahon actually knew, what the whole Toy Story thing reference was at all. Because, I mean, there's always that discussion, right, that he has absolutely no idea of pop culture at all. So I was wondering if, he was sitting there kind of saying, what the hell are these guys saying? I don't know, but it's over. So I guess, let him go with it. That's what I'm picturing Vince McMahon during this long-winded promo.
If he had realized that, I think he would have done the sing-along version that happened last week on Monday Night Raw, where they cut out Enzo Amore and Big Cass's mics. They would have done that on a pay-per-view. had he really known what was going on. And so I'm going to wholly agree with you on this one. I think he just looks at Enzo Amore and Big Cass and hears the crowd and goes, all right, let's roll with it, guys.
Hey, they got a catchphrase. It's over. So that's all we need. Go.
And let's move over to this match now. The second Hell in a Cell of the night, right smack dab in the middle of the card, your Universal Championship match. Kevin Owens defeating Seth Rollins to retain the WWE Universal Championship, or as I like to say, because Kevin called it years ago, Champion of the Universe. This was an incredible callback. I want to know how many people got what I got. Did you see what they did in this match?
Well, they elaborate.
This was a complete callback to the very first Hell in a Cell match where a WWE employee gets hurt. The first one was a cameraman, so they have to open the cage. That's how they were able to get out. And now, this time around, the referee gets hurt, so they have to open the cage, and Chris Jericho can get in. I thought this was wonderful.
I agree with you. Why? Because I mean, this day and age, not many people remember the first Hell in a Cell.
No, the first Hell in a Cell is a year away from being able to drink in Canada.
Yeah, well, there you go. In Canada,
in Quebec, Ontario's 19.
Let us just. Yes, totally. I was in Toronto last week. Don't even get me started. But this is brilliance. I don't know whether it be the agent, whether it be Kevin Owens, whether it be Seth Rollins, a combination of the two coming up with that, because eventually everything old is new again, and some of the stuff that worked in the Attitude Era can work again now. Obviously, you can't do the Stone Cold thing again, and you can't do there's certain things you can't reproduce, but there are certain classic matches and certain classic moments that would still work in this day and age, and this was a good example of that. And that made it also really hard for the rest of the night, because I think the crowd enjoyed this matchup. I think they had great execution. It kind of really screwed the rest of the card in many ways, because I think the crowd was I even heard that some people were leaving after this matchup. So that goes to show you.
That was the main event in my mind. Your WWE World Heavyweight Championship, unless the other feud is a blood feud, your title belt should be the main event. Now, luckily enough, they had another title belt as the main event, the Women's Championship, and I'm fully 100% agree that the Women's Championship should always be, should always be looked at as an equal to the main heavyweight championship for the guys. But in this sort of circumstance, physiologically, who can go harder is guys who weigh 200 pounds. As opposed to two girls who, $150 and maybe 110, 120 pounds at most. So looking into the match with Kevin and Seth, I really like this. You had that gigantic double table to the outside that Kevin Owens ate from the powerbomb from Seth Rollins. That was insane. The fact that he couldn't get Kevin up at first, and was able to power through, and Kevin actually having core strength, being able to hoist himself up for Seth, that blew my mind.
I mean, who would have thought Kevin had core strength, right? With all the jokes about how fat he is, and he's obviously not supposed to be a professional wrestler.
At the end of the day, he's an athlete.
For sure.
And so to bring into my point, you have in my mind, a fantastic back and forth match that leads to the referee getting hurt. They have to open up the door to get another referee in. In comes Mr. Scarf, Chris Jericho, no list in hand, and turn this into a 2-on-1 match, essentially. Jericho can't win the championship, so he's going to do everything he can to help Kevin Owens win. And I thought that was wonderful. They gave just enough to Seth Rollins afterwards that you're like, okay, all right, he still has a fighting chance. These guys are kind of stupid at some point, so they could get caught, much like getting double pinned on Raw the week before. But you end up here where Seth Rollins essentially just gets murdered, and that's it. And standing above him are Jericho and Jericho and Owens. I couldn't know what I was saying. And you leave the door open for Seth Rollins versus Chris Jericho feud. Going forward, if Kevin has to go off somewhere else for a little bit.
Yeah, there's also been the tease of Owens and Jericho also having a feud. So, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities there still going down the line, and that's the great thing about it. They have some ideas, they have some possibilities. The title picture is staying fresh. I think it's entertaining still at this point. So, but these two guys really, I mean, and we're going to get into it with this next matchup. These guys tore the house down, basically, in the sense that poor guys that had to follow.
Oh, well, listen, I just want hot take. We'll elaborate on it later or maybe on another podcast. We know who should turn face between Owens and Jericho. Who do you think WWE will turn face?
Yeah, they're turning Jericho face.
I hope to God. Anyways.
Yeah, that's automatic. They're definitely going to have Owens turn on him. There's no doubt about it. And then, Y2J's going to play the, victim. That's for sure. No doubt about that.
And talking about poor decision-making, Brian Kendrick versus TJ Perkins for the Cruiserweight Championship. Brian Kendrick defeating TJ Perkins via submission. This was a complete tomfoolery match. This is the kind of match where I tend to be ashamed of watching pro wrestling in public for. Because, you've had for weeks the build up to this, Brian Kendrick saying, this is my last chance, and then finally coming out and going like, listen, TJ, just lay down, please, lay down. And TJ saying, no, you got to win it, you got to earn it. We're going to go out there, we're actually going to wrestle. So they have what I feel is they should have gone balls to the wall, and they didn't. And so a crowd that was already tired and going for the bathroom break, the ones who stuck around just didn't care. Zero reaction. Brian Kendrick goes for his sliced bread number 2, but he flips around to his feet, feigns a knee or ankle injury. TJ Perkins acts all scared that, oh my God, I hurt my friend could be hurt. Gets in close enough. Brian Kendrick headbutts him, then, flips over, puts him into the bully, the bully lock, or what are they calling it? Last chancery, or the pirate's hook?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Anyways, headlock over the back, and TJ Perkins taps out. Brian Kendrick is your new champion by total shenanigans. And that's, listen, you're 10 minutes into that match, and it just breaks my heart to see that sort of thing happen to a division that could have been so much more.
All right, we touched on it off the top of the show and the review, and we touched on it again. But in all I'll say this time around is that these two guys were sent out to die, and they died.
Yeah, well,
the crowd did not care. The crowd took a crap on it basically, and you feel bad for two guys who have a lot of talent and basically got screwed out there. I mean, and that would have happened to anyone. And I guess we could debate and say, well, who else are you going to put there, right? If you had put Dana and Bailey, you hurt Bailey's brand. Meanwhile, the Cruiserweight brand's already been kind of on. So, at this point, I think it ends up being the best choice. I don't know if you agree with me there. If you had to choose one match there to put in that spot, it pretty much ends up being that one. It ends up being the short straw there.
No, it is that for the way that you constructed this card, which if you look at it on paper, okay, you have chamber match, normal match, chamber match, normal match, chamber match, like well spread out. That works.
Elimination chamber match, yeah.
Oh my God, this is killing me, man. It's because we have that pay-per-view. Anyways,
for those who did not listen to last week's episode of the Rowdy Wrestling podcast, Tony kept calling it elimination chamber, and he seemed to be still doing it again. So I just needed to point that out. Now, English take 2. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Old adage, English take 2. Cage match, Hell in a Cell match. So it's well spread out. But really, the later on you get in the show, the matches that aren't going to be your marquee match, those are your bathroom breaks. And, the unfortunate part is if you're going to go ahead and have 2 matches between the cell matches, the first one after Owens and Rollins is really just going to die a death. And that's what that match did.
Absolutely.
So let's quickly, because we only have about 2.5 minutes left in this segment, Cesaro and Sheamus defeating the New Day via disqualification after Kofi Kingston, I believe, kicked Sheamus after Sheamus tried to break Francesca over his head after hitting Big E. The feud continues, and the weird buddy cop movie of Cesaro and Sheamus continues. What do you think of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, we touched on it earlier. They need to find a way for, New Day to continue the run, right? And, get the record. Right. And I mean, how many times could you make them just win cleanly and move on? We talked about how bad the tag team division is right now. So, DQ, continue it along. They had this whole, hey, at least they're doing something with Sheamus and Cesaro, right? I mean, because otherwise, they'd be Sami Zayn right now, right?
That's your Sami Zayn and Neville. But here's my question, though. If you look at it, I believe at SummerSlam, they did almost the same thing here. So, your faces aren't really faces. If you look at this storyline, I mean, it's twice now to retain their championships, they get disqualified. Now, does this look like it was on purpose or Kofi Kingston was simply defending himself? I don't know, if you look at it on paper, it's starting to get a little weird that they want to maybe turn the New Day, but the crowd, the New Day at this point are almost Eddie Guerreroing. They could come out and beat up a grandmother and they'll still get cheered.
For sure. It's much like the Bella situation where they wanted her to have the title as a woman, the longest reign ever. They just basically going through the motions here until they can get that title off them, and they'll need to get the title off them right away. Right after that gets over that hump, get them off. Get the titles off. Try to get this something fresh going.
All right, on that note, we're going to head to another quick commercial break right here on CJIM, Montreal's rock station. We'll be back with the conclusion of the WWE Hell in a Cell 2016 review with Charlotte versus Sasha Banks. Also, we have some TNA news regarding the lawsuit and Billy Corgan and all that's going on. Stick around. All right, welcome back to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast. Tony Stabile here along with Steve Rockamaniac. We're finishing up our look back at WWE Hell in a Cell 2016 right here on Montreal's rock station, CJIM. Main event of the night, what everybody's been talking about, the hot debate about what they should be doing, what WWE should be doing with the Women's Championship. Should it go on last? Should it be over there? Why are we putting it in a Hell in a Cell? There's a lot to talk about here, but the bare facts are WWE since last year have been saying that they want to treat the women as equals to the men, but instead what they do is they say, no, we're gonna be avant-garde. We're gonna make the women a showcase. And in the end, what we've gotten is Sasha Banks versus Charlotte in some form for almost a year now. And it's culminating in the women in the very first Hell in a Cell, where they were very proud and happy to be a part of it, eyes twinkling, while all the men in the company kept turning around going like, no, this is a horrible thing. Hell in a Cell messes you up. It shortens your career, which is, complete hokum BS at this point in the PG era, as nothing happens, as we saw in the match itself. And then they go on to say, well, we're going to be the main event, the very first women's main event of a WWE show, a pay-per-view, because they've main evented Raw and, naturally NXT. Sasha's been there, done that. And, so many people were up in arms about it. It is what it is. WWE's currently using it. They've replaced the women by, the divas by the cruiserweight division, and have now decided that they want to show the world that they're equal opportunity offenders, and have put these women in a match that I honestly feel they shouldn't have been a part of, if only their lack of inexperience. And it goes to show what I said at SummerSlam. Something went wrong in the match. A table broke when it shouldn't have broke. A spot was ruined, and these two girls were deer in headlights. I don't care who your cousin is. I don't care who your dad is. You can have all the talent in the world. You can have it in your genes. But if you haven't done it long enough, when something unexpected like this happens, the wheels fall off, and you're sitting there looking stupid.
Oh, undoubtedly. This is definitely a story of something that was tried to be well planned out, and unfortunately just didn't go their way. Despite all the hubbub, I definitely agree with those who criticize the match placement. I will definitely say that they made a mistake there in terms of how they played this entire card out. But for one, enjoyed so much the NXT run where the women were main eventing those shows, that I was still kind of excited that these two girls were going to main event in Hell in a Cell. I had no problem with that. I had a problem with the fact that Owens and, Rollins was, basically stealing the show halfway through, but I was excited for this match. And, unfortunately, it was just one of those things where when it rains, it pours. So it starts off with, it was something that just makes you scratch your head, and then continues along, and basically a finish that no one expects also makes you scratch your head, and something that had a lot of potential didn't necessarily deliver. but it definitely was something that was worthy of being of getting all the hype around it, because not only these two women, but a lot of women have worked hard in the last couple of years to get this status, and really, in a way, felt bad for them the way it ended up playing out on pay-per-view last night.
No, it really did. And the match itself, what happened here is both women came out and had what a lot of people at work this morning when I came in were like, oh, what were those entrances? They had big WrestleMania entrances. And okay, whatever. You know, Sasha Banks already had that sort of entrance for NXT. You had Charlotte coming out, being carried to the ring by men, and Charlotte and Sasha Banks came out in her Cadillac Escalade looking all boss and whatnot. They're standing there in the middle of the ring. They're doing this thing, you know, starry-eyed, and then all of a sudden, where I think that was their point, both girls started to look a little worried as the cage was starting to lower. Maybe the story they were trying to tell was, okay, the emotion of and pride was going away, and now the realization of, holy crap, I'm about to be locked in a cage with someone who's supposedly trying to rip my limbs off with me happens, and then boom, Charlotte clocks Sasha Banks. They fight. They end up rolling to the outside, and they're fighting on the outside of the ring. And you know, we got the tease of the women climbing up the cage for only a millisecond before Charlotte goes ahead and power bombed Sasha Banks into one of the foreign language announce tables, and she bounced. That table exploded, and it looked like she bounced 3 times before everything hit the floor. And, you know, she was beat up. She was hurt. They did the whole angle where, you know, she was supposed to be stretchered out. They bring her out there. A pair of very familiar EMT guys just trying to put a neck brace around her and cart her off. And that's where I feel the match itself started to have a little bit of a problem, because this angle didn't go like 1 or 2 or minutes. This went, I think, 6 or 7 minutes before finally they had her up and they were starting to wheel her away properly. And somehow they announce, oh, due to Sasha Banks not being able to continue, winner by forfeit. And before before they could finish the sentence, Sasha popped up, and then the referee goes, oh, never mind. And that whole thing just felt so weird and contrived to me. And then they proceeded to have a match where they tried to construct table bridges and everything of the sort, and finally there's a table on the outside of the ring, and Charlotte and Sasha are kind of climbing one of the turnbuckles. Sasha pushes Charlotte. Charlotte, from what we could tell, was trying to gingerly place herself on the table. No, she put herself through it, and that's where the big botch was. You could tell both girls didn't know what to do at this point. They kind of floundered for another 2 to 3 minutes. They set up a table in the corner. Charlotte tried to throw Sasha through it, didn't break. Picks her up, tries to throw her again, didn't break. So then she just rolled down, hit the mat. Sasha hit the natural selection, you know, her kneeling neck breaker thing, and pinned. Charlotte did it to Sasha and pinned her in such an anticlimactic fashion that the crowd, especially the hometown crowd of Sasha Banks, laid silent as Charlotte just held up the championship and they ended the night.
Yeah, and as I was alluding to earlier, you know, it's just a series of poor execution, of bad luck. I mean, technically, the bell didn't even ring when that match started. So they're announcing Charlotte by a winner by a forfeit, and the match hasn't even started. And it's just like, okay, well, let's suspend belief and not think about that. And it ended up being one of those matchups where you go backstage after and you see a bunch of expletives that we can't say on the air on CJIM, and just say, what the hell happened? You know, nothing went their way. And if it had gone their way, we might have a different story today here on the show. I mean, they would have had perhaps a better execution if those tables had broken, if they had, you know, not kind of like been thrown off throughout those botches and those, you know, unfortunate non-table breaks where they ended up being confused to a certain degree.
But here's the thing is, would this have happened had you had one or more, individuals in that ring as a wrestler with more experience. Because there's a bunch of guys that say it. The longer you're in there, the longer your career is, the more often stuff goes wrong, and then you learn to adapt, and it just becomes a part of the match instead of, oh man, all right, finish. You know, it really that, and it's twice now. It's twice now with these two girls. You see something go wrong, they get nervous, and then everything else goes down the toilet.
Yeah, that's there's a lot to be put on the agent in terms of preparing them for that. But like you said, a lot of it's supposed to come naturally. And definitely, I agree with your point. Experience might have changed that as well.
Yeah, if you look, and I'm not trying to put Bayley over like crazy here, but here's Bayley, who's had a much longer career than both of these girls. And when her and Sasha had the match, and I believe they dropped Sasha on her head, cool, a moment went on where both of them collected themselves, and then the match continued. It didn't get frazzled. They didn't have to rush. Things didn't snowball. It just ended up being the way it was. And, at the end of the day, was it the right choice to put the women in the main event? On paper, yes. You had a hometown. You had an opportunity to make a first-time Hell in a Cell, first-time main event on pay-per-view. Like, all that culminated together in a reason why you should have put them. But then when you look at the card, you look at the talent, and you look at the experience of the women, juxtaposed to the experience, or compared to, the experience of the men fighting for the World Heavyweight Championship, I would have turned around and been like, let's put the safe bet to send the crowd home satisfied with the better match because these guys have more experience. Not in a main event setting, but just more experience in a match that is heavily reliant on spots and spots being done well.
And for that matter, another point to touch on, Sasha Banks was originally not scheduled to lose this matchup.
No, that went back and forth a million times.
Yeah, apparently, like coming into Sunday and the live show, she was supposed to win, still scheduled to retain her title. They ended up, giving it back to Charlotte. The reasoning behind that exactly, not sure, but do they want to make her the woman, the female version of Ric Flair and just hold the title 16 times? Maybe.
That might be it. Anyways, let's quickly sum this up. For me, this pay-per-view was filled with, the 2 of the 3 Hell in a Cell matches were more than what I needed for the night. So I can still walk away being very happy with what I saw. It's just unfortunate that the filler matches and main event left such a bad taste in my mouth that this barely gets a passing grade in my mind. What about you?
Yeah, a thumbs in the middle type of thing here in terms of this pay-per-view. Nothing that really made you say, wow, that was great pay-per-view watching. Owens and Rollins would have been the closest to that. But the rest of it did not really, give you something that you say, holy crap, I watched a great pay-per-view last night. So, I think this pay-per-view ultimately, Tony, was missing some Elimination Chamber matches.
So we alluded to it a little bit earlier in the show. We don't have too much time left. We do have time constraints now. What's going on?
Sold.
Exactly. TNA was sold. Look at that, point blank. No, let's really talk about what's going on. The lawsuit today. Judge gave her ruling on Billy Corgan's temporary injunction on TNA. What's going on there?
Well, for those who haven't necessarily followed this lawsuit, basically try to make this short and sweet. Billy Corgan was owed a bunch of money, approximately $1.8 million, by Dixie Carter. He had paid out loans for to keep the production going, and he basically said, well, look at the terms and conditions of the contract. If you read it, basically it says that, and Dixie agreed to this, that if they didn't pay him back by a certain date, that he would get control of the company. He would have 92% shareholder stake in the company, and he would be able to then fire all the useless people that are in charge there and take over the company. However, once again, Dixie Carter has basically weaseled her way out of certain things in the sense that that type of contract is illegal in Tennessee, which happens to be the state that TNA does business in. So basically, the judge ruled against Billy Corgan today in the sense that saying, well, listen, you can't get 92.5% of the company because this contract is not fully legal in Tennessee. However, you do have the choice of either taking your $1.8 million or 36% of the company, as was, basically dealt in certain other parts of this deal. It would give them 36.5% of the company. At the same time, we have Fight Network, who is involved in this, Anthem Sport, who are, trying to get control of the company, basically. And I was down in Toronto last week, spoke with some Fight Network representatives. We have a little bit of an inside source on this. Basically, Fight Networks went to TNA, went to Dixie Carter, and said, listen, don't give everything to Billy Corgan. We'll pay off his debt. We'll pay off the debt. Give us the shares. Give us the tapes. And we'll keep you afloat. So Dixie went for it. And they tried to pay Billy Corgan. In fact, they sent him a $1.8 million check. He refused it. He sent it back. He said, I'm not signing for that. I'm not taking that. I'm going to see you in court next week. And, well, unfortunately, he kind of got played a little bit by Dixie Carter, but this is far from over. There is a statement put out by Billy Corgan's lawyer saying that, this is not the end. This is far from over. And that they will continue to, in fact, Billy's looking forward to, quote, forward to the opportunity to conduct full discovery into these matters, present his case in its entirety to the court at a later date. He was accusing Dixie of hiding business affairs, the emails with WWE. In fact, there's emails with WWE where she said, listen, I'm going to sell to you, but I got to get Billy out first. Basically, everybody turned on Billy Corgan because apparently he wanted to take over and run the business his way. I can't blame the guy. I followed it. I followed this situation. I saw Billy Corgan realizing slowly but surely. I'm an avid listener of the Vince Russo podcast, who is close friends with Billy Corgan. And not only through interviews that he did, but also other emails that he had sent to Vince Russo, you saw that slowly but surely, Billy Corgan realized that, wow, these people are not the right people to be doing business with. And we documented it well in recent editions of the Rowdy Wrestling podcast that Dixie Carter shouldn't be the one running this business. And so much so that someone within Anthem Sports basically said, we're looking over the books right now, and every time we turn the page, it just gets worse. It gets worse and worse and worse. The business status of this company is in horrible shape right now. Billy Corgan wants to take over, wants to run the business. Fight Network wants to take over, wants to run the business. Each have their own interests. But originally, we reported here on the show that Fight Network wanted a team with Billy Corgan. But they as well saw how Billy Corgan was, and they said, you know what? We're not going to work with you. We'll pay you off, and you go your way. And Fight Network has an interest because with TNA, they get a big brand, and they could try to get into bigger channels on a Dish network because some of their networks don't have full coverage in the States. They have some sub-networks that don't have full coverage in the States. And if they start taking, the big brands like TNA and say, hey, are you interested in this? Well, no problem. But you got to take our other stuff too. So that's kind of Fight Network's interest here. And it's going to go on for a little while here. This is going to be stuck in court for a while.
All right, well, on that note, we do have to wrap it up right now. We're going to have a lot more. We do tweet about it all week long between the shows. Next week, we're going to be back, likely with a very large update regarding this, as it's going to be in court for quite some time, and all the dirty laundry is coming up. So thank you so much for joining me this week, Steve, to review Hell in a Cell and to talk the TNA lawsuit. And we'll be back next week with more great Rowdy Wrestling podcast fun right here on Montreal's rock station, CJIM.
Rock on.
Thank you for listening to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast. Download again next week for more awesome pro wrestling talk only on rowdywrestling.net.